the generational, the spectrum of generations, all with slightly different perspectives. You talked about that. I get so confused with Gen Z, Gen this, Gen that, but whatever it is, the newer, there's people in their 20s, fresh out of university or whatever, again, have a very different attitude to work and life and what have you, and they have a certain requirement. And then the boomers, I'm 66, so I'm different end of the spectrum. But again, something I'm very conscious of. I know a lot of firms are actually concerned about losing all the people of my age group, because there's an awful lot of people with skills, knowledge that will, I was about to say die with them, not literally die with them, but leave with them. And the problem is there's a lot of infrastructure and technology. Not all of the infrastructure and technology is new and shiny. There's some solid, established, old technology churning away, business as usual. If the generation like mine, again, getting a bit dropping names, Triarch or RMDS or something, some of the technology that existed within there was known about by people who are now in their 50s and 60s, and they're leaving, they're retiring. And that's a problem. So there's problems at both sides. There's in getting new players in, and then, people are leaving out the other end.
Yes, but see, David, at the risk of again being political, what you're really touching on is the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And oftentimes we think about, or we have traditionally thought about diversity, we've thought about it in terms of initially gender. And that was a big issue for me 25 years ago in my career. Then we started to think about diversity in terms of people of color. More recently, we began to rightly think about diversity in terms of people that were bringing diverse experiences to the workplace. And that diverse experience is, people that have significant tenure and have experienced, sort of life cycles of business, which is a really important perspective. But you don't want all of those people that, have long tenure. You want to have that as a diverse mix with people that are bringing in new, fresh ideas that emulate and are representative of the customer base. So, I think really passionate topic of mine, which is the absolute importance of a culture within an organization of diversity and inclusion, which is another really big factor in terms of attracting and retaining talent. And I really hope that with everything that's going on in politics today, that organizations that have made a commitment to diversity and inclusion don't go, off-piste, but stay committed to the importance of diversity and inclusion as a really important factor that drives a really healthy and high-performing company.
And I think we're straying into politics. There's a lot of politics in this, but I mean, the practical thing is, if you get diversity and inclusion right, it has very it is something that helps a business to grow and to be profitable and to be better. So it's not just some quote unquote woke thing for the sake of it. It has practical implications. Yeah. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think some of the problem with it is complicated. I don't know who's in charge of it. Is it the CEO? I mean, I don't know where this is thought about or strategized.
It has to come from the top. And I had the great privilege working for Jim Smith when he became the CEO of Thomson Reuters. And in the first few months of his tenure, he formed a task force to tackle the issue of gender diversity. And I was very honored and privileged to be asked by Jim to join that. And I had a conversation one-on-one with him and said, you've clearly got a lot to deal with right now. It was a point when Thomson Reuters was really challenged from just an overall business perspective. And here was Jim stepping in, but he wanted to focus on that. And his response to why was because this is something that is going to really take time for us to see the results, and it requires the CEO to lead it and to sponsor it. And so many organizations kind of push it over to HR, and it's fine, because in a lot of organizations, HR has evolved to one of the key functions in an organization, and it can be implemented. A lot of the programs can be implemented by HR, but really the commitment to it as a real part of the culture has to come from the top.
Is it fair to say you have to invest, you have to spend some money? It actually sucks in some money to begin with, but that will pay off. Again, a phrase I remember hearing, somebody asked the question, what's the difference between an investment and a cost. Investment sounds good and positive, but an investment's just a cost. I mean, they're both the same. They're both about spending money.
Yeah.
And as long as you spend money that has a good end. Although, again, I'm going off in different tangents here. I get a little bit hung up at the moment when people say, oh, we've got to demonstrate ROI. Whatever we spend money on, we've got to link that with, a specific lead or a specific new business. And sometimes some of these softer things, marketing, training, diversity,
Yeah.
it's not, you can't link directly to ROI, but logically it will generate ROI.
I could absolutely totally agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think coming from the perspective of having to sell something, what I would always say to my peers, my team, whatever it was, is our goal is to really try to demonstrate to a customer that what they spend with us on market data or technology around market data is actually a driver of financial performance, which is exactly what you're saying, as opposed to an extraneous cost that you can take out. Now, that's why the whole issue of diversity and inclusion has to be led by the CEO. It has to be believed that this will drive the financial performance of the business.
Because
But
it's a
look, again,
long-term investment, isn't it? You're not going to get
right.
an immediate return.
And that was Jim Smith's point. But look, putting all of that aside, look, I believe that has to be the driver. It will be the driver that at the end of the day, businesses will hold on to. When times get tough, that will be the driver. So we have to do this. But it also, I think there is an element of it being the right thing to do as well. And one of the things that I often saw as a big turning point for CEOs, if we think about the issue of gender, which was kind of more in focus decades ago, I would notice when a CEO had a daughter and the daughter was starting to go to school, I can't tell you how many calls I got from CEOs that would say, or when they got into high school, I'd love to have my daughter have a conversation with you, because they were starting to take, an active role in envisioning the future for their daughter. So now all of a sudden, and I say he, it could be male or female, but typically a male that may not have thought about the importance of diversity, looking through the lens of his daughter, all of a sudden wanted to see an environment in the future where females could have access to the same opportunity that perhaps their son might have. And that became a big belief turning point for many male CEOs.
I mean, there are so many things we could talk about. In terms of telling what we've just talked about, and this whole talent, diversity, and inclusion, and what are if you are talking to the industry out there, what are practical bits of advice? We can't. It could be a 3-hour seminar on that, but if we're just doing 5 minutes or so of some key bullet points of actual practical steps that people working in the industry now, in big companies or small companies, and I think there is a difference between what you do in a big company compared to a small company.
Yeah.
Advice.
So advice is, first of all, what a strange thing to say. Let's start with the data. Understand where your organization is through the lens of diversity, if that's what we're talking about here, relative to the industry. Understand where you're having challenges in particular parts of the industry or at particular points of tenure in retaining talent. So as many, many, many people have said, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So start with the data. I think then it is create a goal. If this is where we are, where do we want to be? So you've got a now and you've got a goal, and then really looking at a playbook that consists of how do we attract the very best talent? And that gets into how are we showing up as a hiring organization? Where are we hiring talent? Is our compensation at the right level? So all of those things that go into how do we attract talent? How do we develop talent? Look at AI, right? I mean, organizations, if you just think about that one thing, are having to invest in developing their talent to be able to operate in an environment that's very difficult. And then the third is really how do we then retain talent? So look at those three pillars and put together a really simple, executable plan, and then make sure that it is being measured, that it is actually tied into the bonus and the performance and the performance based bonuses of key executives. And it's that simple, really.
And I think there's another dimension which runs across all of those, which is how do we communicate? How do we promote our industry and roles in our industry outside of that? And I don't know if this is possible. We often talk about this. I mean, a classic thing I've heard in the FISD world is, oh, let's go to all the universities and explain how wonderful market data is. There's two problems with that. There's hundreds of universities. Who's going to all these universities? Maybe individual companies do recruitment fairs at different universities. And also, I don't know. I mean, question I'd ask you, and I think I know my answer on this, is I don't think you can persuade somebody in their second year at university to want a career in market data. I think you might persuade them to go into finance or technology, something broader. Is
Yeah.
it realistic to persuade undergraduates or even high school students to want a career in market data?
Yeah, look, I think that's the question that we really struggle with. I think a lot of jobs are, around role models, right? Financial markets, obviously, I think is a target for a lot of people. So I think attracting people, as you say, into financial institutions. But then once inside the financial institution, how do the financial institution, I think, themselves position the roles of technology, data, analytics, as a cool role? One thing probably is not having market data sitting in procurement or sitting in the finance function, putting it into the technology part of the organization. Look, I think it is really all about role models. If you think about getting young
Yeah.
girls, into technology, that's been a whole big push, in many places on an actual government level of making STEM, attractive to girls. And that has really been all around role models. I remember a really funny little story that somebody said to me once. It was a young boy, broke his arm, went to the ER. The nurse was female. He had to have surgery. The anesthesiologist that came in was a female, and the surgeon was a female, the physical therapist was a female. And after the whole experience, the little boy said to his mother, "Mom, can boys be doctors too?" I
Would
love
you?
that story
Yeah.
because it's a great example of one of the things that I think a lot of people, particularly if you look at people of color as well, and that have achieved success, or females that have achieved success, inevitably, somewhere in part of their story, they said they looked up in an organization and saw no one like them. So they didn't think there was any hope. And that's when a lot of people deselect, by the way, particularly women. Or the successful ones often looked up and saw someone that looked like them, and that gave them hope, and it gave them, an aspiration to strive for those roles. So however the role models are created, I think within financial institutions, we, need to take the steps to make those roles something that is aspirational for people to want to pursue.